Dune Imperium Uprising is an oddly difficult concept to explain. It's a completely standalone game, which firmly places it outside the realms of being an expansion. At the same time, it's not quite a sequel either, as it's still fundamentally the same game as Dune Imperium. Uprising is more of a Dune Imperium remaster, but the best kind of remaster as it's fully compatible with all previous Dune Imperium products. This unique position means it's open to new fans without alienating old ones. Since Uprising is equal parts new and familiar, I'm going to be making a lot of comparisons to the original game. I highly recommend checking out my review of the original Dune Imperium if you haven't already, as plenty of the things I say about it are just as relevant to Uprising. Uprising makes changes to the game board, and features all new leaders and cards while also adding some new mechanisms. That said, the core of the game still plays the same way. It's a hybrid deck builder and worker placement game where your deck dictates where your agents can go and what they can do. Dune Imperium was, and still is, one of the best board games available. Uprising builds on that success with new stuff and some under-the-hood changes that make a huge difference in how the game is played, without actually changing how you engage with it. Like all Dune Imperium products, Uprising is a thing of simple beauty. While many components are just wooden shapes, it also features excellent artwork and smooth iconography. The game's great use of colors and clean layout makes the game look good on the table, despite its simplistic pieces. The choice to use such components helps keep the game's price accessible, while still offering premium add-ons for enthusiasts, which is the way I would really like to see most board games handled. I'm also a sucker for wood tokens, so there's that. If the original game was missing anything, it was both the physical and mechanical presence of the terrifying sandworms. That has been remedied in Uprising. Sandworms can be summoned into battle, and the game includes both wooden and plastic versions of the beasts. The plastic miniatures look disgusting, in a good way, but the shape of them makes for a rather unfortunate visual of the male reproductive organ and its pals when you turn them sideways.
That's a penis!
This is neither a strength nor a flaw, it's just something my immature brain wanted to share because it makes me giggle. Grow old, not up. There's also a set of components and boards that are used purely for a special 6-player game mode. I did not have the opportunity to test this mode, so I won't be speaking on it except to note that it exists, and to clarify something that is easily missed. Uprising can be played at player counts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6, not 5. It's rare for a game to skip a number, and I almost didn't notice it. I commonly play with a group of 5, and it would have been rather embarrassing, as the self-proclaimed expert of the group, if I had set Uprising up for its non-existent player count. My ego was put at risk. Another new addition is a couple of stacks of cardboard contract tiles, one set for standard play and the other for use with the Rise of Ix expansion. They look nice and are sturdy and share a similar quality with the tech tiles found in the aforementioned expansion. Like the original game, Uprising comes with plenty of nice components. The cards do get shuffled a lot, so I do recommend sleeving them, however. Most of the game board has been altered in some way compared to Dune Imperium. Each individual change causes a shift in how Uprising is played, but much like the original, they work together to form a cohesive whole. In general, victory points are more difficult to acquire. You don't really stumble into them anymore. It takes a deliberate effort on your part to acquire them. For example, fold space no longer exists. This means that there is no card that is always available in the Imperium row with faction icons. Not only that, but 3 powerful spaces require you to have at least 2 reputation with a specific faction. Bene Gesserit is the only one without such a space. However, they've replaced the always available Arrakis Liaison with their own Prepare the Way cards, which require 2 reputation with them to fully utilize. The conflict cards have fewer victory points available, with most of them appearing on the Tier 3 conflict cards. However, you also gain the conflict card when winning that conflict. Each one has an icon on the top right, and a matching pair grants you a victory point. At the start of the game, each player also has an objective card with one of those icons, and they can be matched with the conflict cards as well. These changes put a much stronger emphasis on your deck building in order to visit the faction spaces you want, as well as making you be extra picky over your battles. The rewards for second and third place in combat tend to be really good, but matching the conflict card icons is also a factor you have to keep in mind. Sometimes it can be worth going a little harder in battle simply to stop another player from matching icons for that free victory point. To help compensate for these changes, card draw and trashing cards are a lot more common, which again puts an even stronger emphasis on deck building, and that's great. Solari is a bit easier to obtain in Uprising than the original, and gaining your Swordmaster only costs 6 if another player has already gained theirs. That combination of changes makes the Swordmaster flow a bit more naturally, and it's pretty common for most players to have the Swordmaster every game. While that does somewhat eliminate a potential strategy from Dune Imperium, Uprising adds plenty more. Having 3 agents to play simply makes the game more fun because you're engaged with the gameplay even more. Since card draw is more common, it generally makes up for spending that third card without damaging your reveal phase too much. I also like that every faction has something powerful locked away at 2 reputation. With the Space Guild, it's easy money and faction rep. With the Freeman, it's access to the powerful Sandworms. And the Emperor completely replaces the Mentat space with something that makes far more sense and feels like less of a trap than the Mentat did. For 3 Solari, you draw a card and recall an agent you previously placed. You can also discard an Intrigue card for a new one. It has a lot more utility than the Mentat, while also being less of a newbie trap. Since it requires 2 reputation with the Emperor, it's not something a new player can inadvertently get sucked into, and it requires effort to gain access to in the first place. The massive Sandworms of Arrakis were a simple footnote in Dune Imperium. Uprising makes them a powerful force to be reckoned with. Any player can use Sandworms in battle. They add 3 strength each, but they go back to the supply afterward, not your garrison. More importantly is the fact that they double any rewards you gain from a conflict card, including victory points, all by simply having them in the fight. The balancing factor, however, is Sandworms take a real effort to obtain. First, you need a Maker Hook, which can be obtained by visiting Setch Tabor, and that requires 2 reputation with the Freeman. From there, you have to visit a maker space that provides worms, which costs water to visit, and you have to forgo the other rewards there. Furthermore, a shield wall protects 3 key locations. If a conflict is happening on one of them, Sandworms can't be used. That is, unless someone has already broken the shield wall, which once again requires effort. Sandworms are an interesting factor. They are incredibly powerful but balanced out by the effort required to obtain them, and the fact that you completely telegraph your intent to use them by obtaining a Maker Hook. Those factors make Sandworms a strategic choice rather than an automatic one. You don't need them to win at all, but you must always be aware of their potential appearance and be prepared to act accordingly. Choosing the right moment to deploy Sandworms is pivotal, since you don't keep them after a battle, and you're likely to have a bit less in the resource department than the players who haven't been pursuing them. However, a well-timed Sandworm attack can completely turn the tides of the game in your favor. They emit a fearful presence into the game, and that's fitting for the colossal beasts. Spies are a new element introduced in Uprising. Observation posts are linked to 1 or more board spaces. Whenever a card or effect allows you to place a spy, you place one on an observation post. Plenty of cards or leader effects bank off of spies, but they generally have 2 main uses. When you send an agent to a space that has a spy linked to it via an observation post, you can choose to recall that spy to gain one of 2 effects. One effect is to simply draw a card, and drawing cards is good for numerous reasons. The other is to place your agent in a space that is already occupied by an enemy agent. Through the strategic use of spies, you can counter another player locking you out of a space that you desperately needed. Spies are a very elegant system that fits right into the core gameplay, and it further expands the tactical nature of the game. Contracts also do this, although they are technically optional. If you don't want to play with contracts, you simply gain 2 Solari whenever you visit a contract space. I found playing with them to be far more enjoyable, however. 2 contracts are always available. When visiting a contract space, you choose one and keep it. Sometimes they just give you resources, other times they reward you for completing them by visiting a specific space or gathering a certain amount of spice all at once. It's another small system that simply makes the game feel even better by further expanding your strategic options. It's all part of a common thread that I found to be true when it comes to Uprising. While the fact remains that you are pretty much playing the same game Dune Imperium has always been, it feels like you're doing more every turn and every round. Your turns feel even more important and impactful. You get to do more things, and doing things is the best part of playing a board game. There are some games that I loathe to play simply because 3 hours will pass, and when I look back on the time I spent, I realize I hadn't technically played that much. Dune Imperium never had that problem, but Uprising makes your turns feel even more impactful without compromising the tight strategy that made the game great in the first place. That's a tightrope to walk, but Uprising wore its ballet shoes. The cards and leaders in Uprising are brand new. They aren't reprints of those found in the original game. The leaders feel unique and balanced, even when compared to the original ones and those found in the Rise of X expansion. The Imperium cards maintain the first game's excellent melding of theme and mechanics, but they do feel less generalized than Imperium's selection. Many of the cards in Dune Imperium felt like they were all-around great choices, while Uprisings are powerful but feel more situational. That's not a criticism exactly. For the most part, it enhances the strategy, but it does make the game slightly less accessible, and that's probably true for Uprising as a whole. Now, don't get me wrong, Dune Imperium has never been a difficult game to learn, and Uprising isn't either. However, all of the changes in Uprising make it harder to be good at. That was true of Dune Imperium post-expansions, but with Uprising, it's definitely more visible, and the skill floor sits a bit higher. I'm pretty good at Imperium, but in my first few games of Uprising, I got kicked into Mentats, and sand rubbed in my face. Even for experienced players, there's a lot of adapting that you have to do, and while this isn't Uprising's fault per se, humans are stubborn. Some previous fans may have a knee-jerk reaction to the changes and bounce off of Uprising, because habits are by nature difficult to break. I'd advise really giving it some time with several plays first. As for the new Intrigue cards, there aren't any noticeable changes to mention aside from the fact that Uprising repeats a grievance I had with the original, and that's the inclusion of sneaky endgame victory points. Given the game's tightness, they still have too much of an impact that ends up feeling really cheap when you're on the losing side. When it comes to the original game, the issue more or less vanished as expansions added more ways to gain victory points, as well as more Intrigue cards. Uprising in a vacuum has that same endgame intrigue card ick as the original pre-expansions. However, Uprising is compatible with said expansions. The most surprising thing about Uprising is that it's compatible with all previous Dune Imperium expansions and the original game. It even comes with special contract tiles for Rise of X. I played several games of Uprising by itself, but once I added Rise of X and Immortality, I left them together, and that's how I will always play going forward. They integrate beautifully into the game. The expanded deck building of Immortality feels great with Uprising's changes, and the shipping track and Dreadnought slot in really well. All of the previous leaders feel balanced with new ones, and the combination of Uprising, X, and Immortality feels like the true apex of Dune Imperium's gameplay. I do have a slight annoyance with Rise of X's overlay tiles. Obviously they don't have observation posts marked on them, but you are to treat them as if they do. I don't really like that. I would have appreciated a token overlay to mark them, but that's a rather minor gripe. On the flip side, the compatibility gets slightly messy if you want to play with some of the original game's Imperium and Intrigue cards. If you already own the original, that's a pretty reasonable desire to have. You see, by adding just Rise of X and Immortality, you get close to the same card distribution as the original game with both expansions. But if you add the original game's deck too, you dilute everything terribly. The rulebook's only guidance is to add them wholesale or make your own custom Imperium deck combo, and boy do I have a bone to pick there. To make a custom combo function, you would need a carefully curated list of cards. Not just the ones you want to use from the original, but the cards from Uprising, X, or Immortality that you want to replace. There are numerous variables that go into the game's card distribution. You would have to factor in icons, faction icons, card costs, and allegiance distribution in addition to the mechanical effects each card provides. It's well beyond the reasonable scope of most players, as you would need an intimate knowledge of not only the game itself, but the analytics of each and every factor of the cards in order to throw together a custom deck that wouldn't be borderline unplayable. Why a curated list or even several variants of them wasn't included is beyond me. That said, I'm working on one personally, and if I ever put together anything that doesn't suck, I'll share it. Solo play works as gracefully in Uprising as it did in the original game. In some ways, it streamlines the process even more. You no longer awkwardly place the Autumn's agents under the conflict cards to time when they get their swordmasters, for example. It's all built into the new rival cards. The rival cards replace the actual character boards for your opponents. Each rival initially hoards resources, spending them on their swordmaster when they reach a threshold dictated by the rival card, after which they spend them normally. They also add a bit more personality to your adversaries as they include some solo-tailored abilities for them. There are several ways to tweak the difficulty level of a solo game, but as a whole I found the rivals to be much more competitive. They don't dawdle, and then the victory points start flowing fast. Running the rivals is still as simple as flipping a card and following its instructions. Each rival card also has a handy track of which factions they prefer to gain reputation with, so there's rarely any confusion in their decision making. It's all upfront and clear. Dune Imperium is one of the few games where I never felt like I was getting a lesser experience by playing solo. Everything that Uprising adds to solo play is a straight upgrade in that regard, and it will continue to be one of my go-to solo experiences going forward. One thing I really like about Uprising is the fact that it doesn't need to exist, but does. A remastering of this nature usually implies the need to fix something that's broken, but Dune Imperium is still a stellar game even without Uprising. I think Uprising is indeed a better version of it, and the compatibility means you don't lose anything by picking it up. But if a person without any Dune at all only had the choice between the original Dune Imperium or nothing, I would tell them to jump on the original in a heartbeat, because everyone needs some spice in their life, even the psychedelic kind excreted by Sandworms. Uprising succeeds as an improved version of Dune Imperium because Dune Imperium is so good in the first place. It would have been a hard sell if it had been billed as an entirely new product, but its compatibility with the original base game in both expansions makes it a great addition rather than a wholesale replacement. For existing players, it's an easy recommendation because it's more Dune Imperium. For new players, it's an easy recommendation because Dune Imperium is easy to recommend, and Uprising feels like a tuned-up version of the designer's original vision, applied after years of experience with designing the base game and its expansions. Uprising joins Dune Imperium, Rise of Ix, and Immortality in earning my Golden Shield Award. If you enjoyed this video or found it informative, consider liking and subscribing. It definitely helps me out a great deal. I've also left links down in the description below, including to my website, where you can find the bulk of my written content, but also to my Patreon, Ko-fi, Twitter, and more. But in any case, thanks for watching, and until next time.